to season 2 of Bimcast. And this season we have exciting stuff coming up, interesting themes and interesting people that we'll invite into our studio. So we're really looking forward to that. But today, really exciting, we have Frode Mohus. He's probably best known as Chief BIM Officer, as a playful title. He has been in Statsbygg, which is the company in Norway from the state that owns all the state-owned properties in Norway for the central government. And he's been there for as long as I can remember. I think I met him in 2003. And he's been one of the most deep-thinking people I know that knows, I would say, everything about BIM, but of course, when you know everything about BIM, you know that you don't know everything about BIM. So, Frode, welcome to Bimcast.
Thank you. I'm the one that knows that I don't know everything about BIM.
I don't believe you, but well, let's try that.
That's right.
You guys have been working on what you would call a BIM manual, and it's version 2.0.
Yeah, that's coming up now.
Yeah, and what do you think about when you set out to create BIM manual 2.0 for Statsbygg? What's your what do you consider in terms of pitfalls and in terms of what you need to capture and so forth?
Well, this is a long story. We, as you mentioned, we met back in 2003. I think it was in Singapore.
Yes.
And we started using the AECOO standard for the first time. We had our first BIM project around 2005, and after that we found out that we had to make a BIM manual. At that time, a BIM manual was just a document, a Word document, PDF document, something like that, that tried to explain what kind of a model we were out for. And the first version, I think, came in 2008 or 2009. At that time, we also had to more or less teach the AECOO community something about what BIM was all about. We tried to understand what an object model was versus just a 3D geometry model. So we used quite some time on that. After that, we made another version that was, in my opinion, quite a lot better because it had more requirements related to properties and the concrete stuff. So we used that for a couple of years. And from 2011 we've had a requirement that every Statsbygg project should use BIM, or at least as a main rule. So we started working with a manual that was more descriptive in the requirements, but at a certain point it's not exact enough. You can read it, you can try to understand it, you can use software like, say, Solid Model Checker, and try to put up a rule set or something like that to know what you should enter into the model and what you should test for. But you can't actually use software for automatic validation. And that's what we've been living with for the last, well, say 5-6 years. We have not changed our manual for 6 years, but now it's time. And then we're not making just another PDF. We have understood that we have to make these requirements precise, and so that they can be validated in software. I think the main point is that we will try to validate whatever can be validated, to free up time for using evaluation and do stuff that you have to have humans to do. So what we've done is taking the Building Smart standard, MVD-XML, and try to put up a requirement set that uses MVD-XML, or it can be exported to MVD-XML, so it can be put into software to try to validate it automatically.
Cool. And when you set out to do this, I mean, could you give an example or a few examples of what kind of requirements you put into the BIM manual that people need to enter into their models?
Well, I can use any kind of example, but let's take fire rating for example. Quite some object types like walls, windows, doors need fire ratings at some time. you may have a fire requirement, and you may have a fire, what the actual window does or supports. So for a wall, for instance, there is a property in AECOO that says fire rating. He said wall comment dot fire rating, to be exact. So we have that kind of requirement in the manual, and can export it to MVD XML, so that you know that when you're entering an AECOO model, you get validated that this fire rating is in the right place in the model. That's more or less the basic kind of validation, the existence of something that is called fire rating.
Do you also consider, when you're designing this this manual, do you consider what's possible for the BIM authoring tools to enter into, or do you think that we're not going to be constrained by whatever these guys can do? We're going to put a requirement that we need.
We try to combine it. We know that there is something called Revit and ArchiCAD and MicroStation and Vectorworks and software like that. So we work with some of the design teams that we usually work with, and then they use these kind of softwares. So when there are some problems related to this is not the way we do it in ArchiCAD, or this is not the way we do it in Revit, we try to take that into consideration, so that we don't enter any requirements that are not feasible to obtain in practical life. Just to add to that fire rating discussion, the basic thing, as I mentioned, is to say that there is something called a fire rating. But there are, in a more advanced kind of validation, you would also like to see if the data value for that is Donald Duck or Merry Christmas, or something that is useful for fire rating, like EI60. So we want to also validate that. That's also what we try to do.
How do you do that?
Well, then you get into the deep technical stuff and what's possible with MVD XML. I'm not a super expert in that, but we do have in the team now, we are using a database from AEC3 in Germany. And I guess they are well known for being IFC model experts, so we try to use them and their competence to try to see what we can do with MVD XML. Currently there is version 1.1. There's an upcoming version 1.2 that we hope can be used to make more kind of, regex kind of expressions.
This is very exciting, because I think I've been working a lot with building smart data dictionary. We had another podcast about that, but it's exactly where this comes into its strength, because you can put in data in an MVD XML that you can automatically validate using a computer to check if the term is actually a valid term, like EE60 or whatever. And that kind of combination is very, very exciting. And I don't know if you have forced that into your BIM manual, or if that's something that will come at a later point, or something like that. But I think that's a very powerful place when you can actually validate if it says Donald Duck or Merry Christmas or whatever.
Yeah, so we have just started doing this. Basically, we are currently only testing existence of something, a fire rating or acoustic rating or a U value or whatever. But it's coming, we hope.
Excellent. When it comes to because you have in a construction project, or when you build a building, there are different phases. And I can imagine that you need different things at different stages and different phases. So when you write this BIM manual, is that the common denominator for all the phases, or do you have distinguished between when you're in the design phase, we need this stuff, but when you're in the construction phase, we're going to need this stuff, and so forth?
Yeah, you have to divide that. We have basically now what we have produced till now is 4 basic requirement sets, sort of a template for the 4 main domains: architectural, structural, mechanical, and electrical. and we have 9 milestones or points on the timeline that you can validate with. So you can select any one of those 9 and say we are at basically this point in time in our project now, and we want to validate for this. And this is also at least partly related to what you could call Model Maturity Index, or MMI, or LOG, or LOD, or whatever you would like to call it.
Yeah, whatever are we calling it these days?
We're calling it everything. But I hope that ISO and SEN will try to conclude on that and call it something. I think they currently call it LOIN, Level of Information Need. So let's see if that's the final term.
I've seen a lot of LOX out there. Just
LOX as well.
to denote that there is something after the O, but we don't know what it is.
So yes, we have those 4 requirement sets for those 4 domains, and we have 9 points on the timeline, but currently only for 3 of the design phases. We are starting this year working on the as-built requirements. Basically, the most detailed design phase includes most of what should be designed. After that, it's more about some adaptations to making the building actually being buildable. And after that, we have the requirements set for the as-built. And the extra information that you enter into the model at the as-built stage is related to the actual product. You're going from a generic product, like a generic door, to a door called something like a Sve door type XYC 123 something. And the additional information is related to that. So in that context, we also have seen that there are other open standards that are quite interesting. I know now that Building Smart have tied up more or less with GS1, which are holding some of the interesting standards here. You have the get-in number, the global trade item number, which uniquely identifies each merchandise, each product. So this store from this producer has a unique get-in number. And that is some of the key information that we would like to enter into the BIM. And if we do so, we may not need to enter all the other information. If we have that get-in number, we can use databases to find out more about the product, or more or less everything about the product in merchandise databases.
So just to recap a little bit, you have a dimension in terms of the different domains that are part of this, architect and electrical and so forth.
Yeah.
So they can look at in their own section of the BIM manual and see what they're required to do. And then you have a timeline, so you have 9 milestones throughout the different phases of the construction project and even the operations phase, putting different requirements of what you need to enter into the model. So that becomes a very complicated beast then.
Yeah, but you select just one of the beasts.
Sure.
And you validate for that at any given time.
Yeah,
so.
of course.
And also I think I mentioned that it is a template. In the requirement database that we use, we can quickly change the template so it's related to the actual construction project. So we can tick another requirement, or we can remove a requirement or add some new requirements quite easily, and export that to MVD XML.
So you have a sort of a flexible setup. That's very interesting. And how do you because there is I can imagine there are 2 sets of data that could be interesting. One is the requirement from a client like yourself. When you are building this building, I would like to have a minimum fire rating on this door like this, and I would like to have a minimum ceiling height of this, and so forth. And then when you start designing the model, you may put a higher fire rating.
Yeah.
Do you then have a place for your requirement and a place for the new or the designed requirement, or how do you deal with that?
I think that's a good question. We have opted to have our own requirement database that holds all the requirements in the database. We currently use a software called DROFUS. it's a Norwegian software company, for holding all those requirements, saying that this space has a program area of 12 square meters, or it has to have a ceiling height of 2.40 meters, or any fire requirement or whatever. And what we would like to do is, when we use the BIM manual, we have requirements for the solution, for the BIM that is actually produced by the design team. And then we want to compare at any given time. We want to compare the requirement set that we have in the office with the actual BIM from the architect or the other designers. So we can compare the programming area to the constructed or designed area, for instance, or a daylight requirement for a room, for instance, and see where have those rooms been designed in the actual model. So if you see that some of the spaces that have a daylighting requirement are placed down in the second level basement, you may have some work to do. So yeah, so that's basically the idea, to try to separate the requirement database from the BIM manual that has requirements to the actual solution.
But how does this work then? So you have your own sort of requirement database. I presume it's a BIM, building information model instance with your requirements.
It can be exported as a BIM. We can actually take the requirement set in the office and export it to IFC if you want.
Exactly.
Or to Excel, or to whatever you want.
So you have that, and then as the project progress, the architect will design and come with his model. Mm-hmm. The electrical engineer will come with his model, and at some point this is what you have, and then you will take your model and the model that you were given from the domains and compare it.
Try to do that.
Yeah.
And for some points that's quite easy. Say for electrical outlets, you can just count the outlets. You can say that for this space you have a requirement for 8 outlets, and in the electrical model you have say 5 double outlets, which adds up to 10. Then you can compare. For other kind of requirements, that's not so easy to compare directly. For instance, you may have a requirement for space temperature in the space between, say, 21 and 26 degrees Celsius, and that cannot be compared to anything directly in the model. But you may have to do some kind of simulation to find out if that's actually fulfilled.
When it's minus 40 outside and the one heater inside, does it work?
Yeah. And some of the requirements are, they have to be just written out as a text, saying some ambitions from the client about how the architecture should be, or how the environmental requirements basically add up. And then you have to evaluate by some human if that is fulfilled or not.
So you can actually have then, let's say, a responsible person in the architect domain saying, yes, this requirement is fulfilled, I'll sign this here and say yes. Yeah.
So back to the BIM manual, I think what's nice is that when you can automatically validate something, you get a higher quality model for that, and then you can free up time to do all the rest of the stuff, because you can never automate everything. I think that's quite impossible.
I think we'll get there, but
you do?
I'm not sure. I think there is you can always get much further than you think you can do today, but at the same time, the ambitions and the requirements of the buildings will be pushed as well. So you might always have something that's on the edge and outside of the current available tools. Yeah. So there might be a balance there, but
I guess, if I should guess 5 years from now, I would guess that some of the AI technology, artificial intelligence, will probably help us in that direction.
I think so too, and I think it can be. There are different opinions on where we are with artificial intelligence at the moment. Some people are very scared of the development and are afraid of what's going to happen. Others are saying we're so far behind and all the hype and everything it's meaningless. And so where are we? I'm no expert, so I don't know, but I can just imagine that we can get to a place where that will be a very powerful asset and help us a lot in terms of evaluating if the requirements are met or not, and also to push for more requirements. For example, the what you mentioned, can this room keep a temperature between this and that? And if you have artificial intelligence and a lot of experience and data measured on buildings that have certain things, and I guess you can simulate pretty good and be a pretty good estimate of, yes, this with the current equipment in this room, you can meet the requirement.
You'll probably go in that direction, I think, but there's a saying that artificial intelligence will never beat real stupidity, so I think you'll end up with some stupidity anyway.
That's probably true. I have this idea of, if you can imagine, go as far enough into the future, and you have a rich enough model, and if you keep adding data, keep adding information, keep adding stuff, eventually you will be able to simulate everything, because you have exactly what the heating system in the room will perform, and you know how it's connected through the automation system, and you know if you push this button, this will happen, and if it's this much temperature outside, you have all the U values and all that stuff, so you can actually do a lot of that. And then if you have everything exact, you should be able to push a button and have the building be built by robots.
Could be. We have, by the way, started trying some robots at the very basic level. On 2 of our projects, we've used a drilling robot for drilling holes up in the slab.
By Enlink, right?
Yeah, by Enlink, Norwegian company. I think actually Hilti have bought into that company, so
right.
It may be interesting for them, I guess. So I think that was quite successful. For the model, it means that we will have to model something new that we usually don't do. We have to model the hangers for all the technical stuff to be able to position where the robot should drill. You have to have the XY positions, and you have to be exact on where the origo, the 0 point for this model is. So if you've done the job correctly, it works. I think we used something like 80% of the drilled holes in one of the projects.
I've also heard an experience from that is that there was much easier work on the site because everything was planned during the design phase. You decided who's going to go first, is it the ventilation, is it the electrical engineer, and where are they going to do stuff, and they knew exactly what kind of bends and materials they needed. So it was a much smoother site operation than what normally happens, is what I heard.
Yeah, well, I guess you're touching into 4D BIM now.
Yes.
So it's actually using the BIM for planning and the project and the progress of each of the objects, and then trying to also enter into the model the actual times when they are installed or mounted or whatever.
I think that's
quite a potential.
Yeah, amazing potential. I think it is actually, if you turn it around, amazing that's not being done everywhere because the potential is so great.
But of course, there is you have to have some gain before you do that. There has to be a sensible cost-gain ratio. So I think the project has to be of a certain size, of a certain complexity before you do that. If you do so, you have some fantastic software that can help you from, say, Synchro or AECOO or software like that. They can help you plan. And then you have also some mechanisms that you can use for entering the actual times. Like using, say, RFID tags on the projects when they enter the building site, and actually scan them and say, okay, now I've mounted this lighting fixture, and you can enter that timestamp into the model.
Yeah, that's brilliant, and that's, I think, will be more and more pervasive in the industry as we move forward, because it's such an obvious thing to do and keep control, traceability, all that stuff.
Yeah, and it's mature technology, and it's actually very cheap. So that's definitely an opportunity that we'll look further into.
I also think there will be an element of artificial intelligence or machine learning in designing, let's say, everything that's above the roofing.
Yeah.
You could probably automate exactly who's going to go first and what's going to be installed when and how and so forth.
And also the layout, probably.
I think so too. So I think that's coming. A little bit back to the BIM manual that you're working. What was the biggest challenge in producing this from your point of view?
Well, just to try to think aloud, we started with the previous manual and tried to enter the requirements that we had there, and then we went into discussions with the design teams about more or less every requirements, if they were sensible or not, and we changed quite a lot in that during that period. So it takes some time. It's quite a lot of work to go through it and try to find out what are the sensible requirements. Another aspect that we found out that we hadn't actually solved was how to enter model requirements for those domains that do not have their own physical objects being built. I basically think about the domains of fire engineering, acoustic engineering, environmental engineering, and that kind of domains, because they don't have their own objects in the model. When an acoustic engineer has some acoustic requirements, he has, in some way, he has to enter that into the architect model. And then he either has to have a good relationship with the architect and be allowed into the model, or he has to deliver some kind of Excel spreadsheet or whatever to the architect, for the architect to put into that. But that, again, raises some questions about who's responsible, if any mistake is done, who's responsible for that. If the architect updates his model, how should you go back to the acoustical engineer to ensure that the requirements are still valid, and that kind of stuff. So we have started into working into how can we make a requirement model or a requirement set, an MVD XML for that. And that's quite a tricky stuff.
What's the tricky part?
Because say you have a long corridor wall. In that corridor, on the other side of the corridors, you have different kind of rooms. Some rooms may be just offices or meeting rooms, but you may have some equipment there that has got a lot of noise or has to be protected with some kind of fire rating. So at different parts of that corridor wall, you have different kind of requirements from the different domains. The acoustical engineers may want the architect to split that wall into 3, because he has 3 different acoustical requirements. But the fire engineer, he has 5 different requirements at separate parts of that corridor. So the architects can't split that into, say, 15 parts of his wall, so that makes it impossible to keep the model updated without splitting the object into a lot of new objects. So what we have looked into is if it's possible with IFC and OpenBIM to specify some way of avoiding that problem. So we looked into something that's called the space boundaries, which is a kind of a relation in the IFC standard, and see if we can use software like, say, Revit or anything like that can make space boundaries. If you have made them, you can, from the space boundaries, make virtual objects. We have something called a virtual element within IFC. And to a virtual element, you can have requirements just as for a real object. So we would like to have requirements for the acoustical engineer or the fire engineer tied to those virtual objects that are created based on a relation called space boundaries. And space boundary basically states what's on the other side of the wall from this room. So that's a kind of a mechanism that we are looking into now. We haven't all the solutions yet, but I think it's quite interesting to see if that's possible.
This is very interesting and sounds like a powerful mechanism for capturing exactly that kind of data that you need. Have you thought about the approach of, I mean, when you build this, you have to build it with the sound requirements, acoustical requirements, and with the fire requirements. I guess you the building actually has to split into those 15 parts or whatever? Or does that not match up straight either?
You mean the final model as well?
Yeah, I mean, when you go on the site and you're going to build this long corridor and you have an acoustic requirement on that part and you have a different fire requirement on the different parts, don't you have to build it differently, or do you build as a one mold with a...
I think you're right. When you've done all the design work and found out what the final solution is, if that wall has to be split into 15 sections, you have to make 15 objects. I think you're right about that, because you have to have a requirement and you have to have an actual fire rating or an acoustic rating for each part of that wall. Yeah.
So there is always this difference between the design need and the construction need from the model. So you need to have a buildable stuff. No, I need to have a designable stuff. And so.
And you also have, from time to time, you may have a design requirement for, say, a fire rating for a door, but for practical reasons, the constructor may just enter one type of door which fulfills all the EI 60 requirements, but some of the doors only have an EI 30 requirement. So for practical reasons, he uses the same door, perhaps. And then you have to actually track that this is in your as-built model, probably by using the get-in number that I mentioned, saying that, okay, this is, as a constructed door, this has an IE 60 requirement, or rating. Yeah.
Another thing I was wondering about in terms of the BIM manual is how do you find it being used? You have had the BIM manual for many years.
Yeah.
How is it used in project, and has it benefited you as an owner?
Some of the problems related to say a classical manual that is just a PDF document is that, of course, that it's very easy to take that kind of a document into a contract, saying that this is valid in this contract. But you, to some extent, they don't make their own evaluations if this manual should be valid or if it should be changed to fit to the project. So I think also a reason for making MVD XML requirement set that are actually gone through and changed for each project is making the quality of the model much better, because the requirement set is tuned to the project and not as a generic PDF template that is used almost blindly. So that's, yeah.
But do you find a lot of resistance out there? Oh, this BIM manual to Statsbygg is impossible, I don't know how to do it, blah, 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 blah. Or do you find it...
a few years ago, I think we had that kind of situation, but as it's been stable now for 6 years, the market seems to know it more or less. That's a positive part of it, that they know what's inside this version from the end of 2013. So they know what it is, at least. There are no new requirements. You also have some software support for the manual. I think Solibri in Finland, with the model checker, they made actually an extension for the BIM manual, saying that this is our this is how we think that the requirements in the BIM manual are, and they made a rule set for it.
I've heard owners out there that state in their sort of contract that we're going to use BIM according to the BIM manual of Statsbygg. But they have no clue what they just stated in that contract.
Yeah.
So the construction companies or whatever that are applying for this job or trying to get the job, they are wary of how to deal with this. Is this something that you have heard as well, or?
Yeah, we also experienced it. I think quite some of the municipalities in Norway. We have some 400 municipalities, and quite some of them are small, very small, and they don't have much of their own competence in modeling. So from time to time they just state that please use Statsbygg's BIM manual, without knowing actually what they say. And the constructor will, of course, have to then assess what kind of a risk this is. Should I just fulfill the manual, or should I take the chance that, okay, they don't know what they do, so I do as I police and what I usually do and see what happens.
Yeah, that sounds like about what I've heard as well. And I think it's a typical attitude, but it's a very understandable attitude. I mean, it's developing the competence, the knowledge, and the market itself. So you guys are kind of really pushing the boundaries, and I think you're. I'm not sure if dragging is the right word, but you're kind of dragging along the rest of the industry, because that you guys put this down requirement, and it's a little bit more than what they're used to, so they have to step up a little bit to learn, and that kind of elevates everybody up, I think.
Well, as a government client, we have some means to do that. We have some resources to do it, and we are told by our owners in the ministry to do so, to try to keep or to bring the AEC industry forward. That's what they want us to do, and we have some means to do it, some funding as well. There's a project called Bygg, Digital Building, that's within our organization now, placed just below the CEO, so they are reporting directly. And they have some funding for doing additional stuff in some of the projects. We're trying to do it small scale first, and then accepting that some of the stuff that we do will not be successful. And with that kind of acceptance, you can do some new stuff that may or may not be successful. This stuff that I mentioned about the drilling robot was part of that, for instance. The use of RFID tags on some of the products was part of that. So we're trying to do some of that, at least first a small scale, and then take the successful parts into a larger scale afterwards and bring it into the ordinary projects.
I think that's fantastic, and I'm really kind of excited about the Big initiative, because it having that attitude that you're allowed to fail allows you to push the boundaries and try out different things, which I think is very necessary, and it allows you to build competence and build skills in the area that can benefit everyone in the sense of the whole industry. So that's very exciting, and I am really impressed that you guys are doing that, and I think this should be something that every country should do with their state-owned funds. Have you gotten a lot of requests from foreign similar entities?
Government clients?
Yes.
Yes, we do have some contacts around Europe and some other places as well that want to visit us and discuss this kind of stuff. So we're trying to share whatever we can share. We are not a commercial partner, so we are a government client that is allowed to do so. So we try to share, yeah.
Awesome. Are there any other things that you would like to sort of add to this conversation at this point that you feel that you want to tell us, or some reflections? Or
well, there are of course a few issues that are related to your company. We are during this year probably purchasing a model server. I don't know.
Exciting.
Catenda is one of the contenders for that, I guess.
I think we'll try, yes.
So we've seen, we've used your product in some projects for basically for trying to link the merchandise, the actual products in a database to the BIM objects, and trying to keep that information as a network link, as a URL, as a property on those BIM objects. So we know that works. So it's an interesting way of using your product. And that there are quite a lot of other uses for a model server that we think is so useful that we will probably purchase that during this year. Another thing that I know we've been discussing this for 15 years, Håvard, about the BSDD. I know you're one of the funding fathers of BSDD or IFD, or what we should call it.
I'd say Lars Bjerkhaug, my colleague, is the funding father. I'm just joining in at the later stage, but yeah, it's I feel like it's a small baby of mine. Yes.
Funding stepfather.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, well, and we know, I think we all agree about the idea about BSDD, we think it's useful because we don't want to enter every bit of information into the BIM. We don't want to overload the BIM, but we want to make the BIM possible to ask databases and other sources for more information. And BSDD is one of the mechanisms that are useful for that, stating exactly what this is. So you can use that word or that term to search in a database or whatever. So we have some ambitions about starting using BSDD a bit more, but we have to also have the software industry with us. All the CAD systems need to adapt BSDD in a better sense, I think, than today.
Now you got me really excited because this
I know.
This was great news. I think the idea of linking data and linked data is an obvious sort of technology that you can use for this. And I think BSDD is a very powerful way of connecting this whole thing together. So that's very exciting. And you don't need the whole industry. We're ready.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding. But I understand your point of view in that sense. But very exciting and something that we've been, we'll be very eager to help push that agenda. And I think there are lots of ways that you could contribute massively to that, being the public client that you are.
I think one of the examples one of the first cases that we would try to do now is in the BIM manual too. We have some properties that are not part of the actual IFC release. The ordinary property sets we try to use, like a fire rating and stuff like that. But then we may have some requirements that are not within the IFC standard itself, but IFC has mechanisms that you can make your own property sets. And what we don't want to is just make a whole bunch of own property sets. For the time being, we are trying to use the same property sets as another large government client, Statsbygg. They are building hospitals in Norway. In the next phase, we would like to at least enter all those requirement sets with the parameters into BSDD, so it could be used as a mechanisms alternatively to just use the BSDD GUID for stating the same thing.
BSDD could really need that kind of clout and support. I think it's very important that we have some larger public clients that are putting their efforts behind this, because it's an obviously powerful solution, but it's not it doesn't run by volunteer work. No. It needs a professional setting around it, and that needs some willingness to pay and funding and a business model and so forth. And I think we need public clients on board to help us create that and set that up and make it sustainable.
Another thing that we probably do is Statsbygg has something called TFM, which is a sort of an inter-domain identification kind of classification for systems and components. It's been used in Norway for, I think, more than 20 years now. This could also be entered into BSDD as just as a classification. We have, I think, 2 or 3 versions of it, so it can be referenced in different projects. If you have used the 2011 version, you can just map it to a 2018 version or whatever.
Yes.
So that's another bone for you.
Exciting. Really
we would
exciting.
like to enter that. There is also an upcoming Norwegian standard for systems and components, so that may be another classification. And on top of that, we have ISO. We have 2 ISO standards that do more or less the same thing, and they can also be referenced to BSDD. And then you can try to talk to the Germans and the Swedes and the Japanese about Norwegian standards through BSDD. So I think it's a good mechanism.
This is awesome. That's plain and simple awesome.
Okay.
I think we've covered most of the stuff that we thought about. So I'm really thankful for a very interesting conversation, Frode. Thank you for coming here. And we look forward to future working together.
Definitely. Okay. Thank you.